Hello YouTube, and welcome to this very special edition of Race Car Fabrication and Restoration. I'm Ronnie Humphrey, and as always, thank you for joining us today. We're getting so many new subscribers to the channel, I thought that it's important to go back and give you the history of this 1988 NASCAR Winston Cup Buick that we are currently restoring. We've been working on this car for over a year now, but I want to go back and give those new viewers, new subscribers, the history of the car, why it's so special to me, what it means to me, and how I got involved with this project. So stay tuned. We're going to tell you all about it. All right, to start off with, I'm going to tell you how I got involved with this car. It's kind of a lengthy story, so stay with me. I graduated college in December of 1984, and there was a bad economy here in North Louisiana because we run off the oil and gas business like us, Texas and Oklahoma. And I couldn't get a job when I graduated. I ended up moving to Georgia. I actually moved to Augusta, Georgia, and which was the hotbed, the heart area of NASCAR country, all on the East Coast in the Carolinas. And knowing what NASCAR was, watching all the races, I felt like I had died and gone to heaven, be out there in the middle where, people in news agencies and newscasts, they would actually cover the race. And we didn't have that in Louisiana at all. But while out there, I decided they had the All-Star Winston race up at Charlotte, and I drove up to Charlotte one weekend to go watch the race. And while I was living in Augusta, Georgia, I drove up to Charlotte. And while I was up there watching, they ran the Winston Open for the qualifiers to try to move up to the actual All-Star race. And there was a car running around, and it had Bob Beard Ford on the side of it. And I said, "My goodness, that's Bob Beard Ford. That's the car dealership from Augusta, Georgia, where I lived at the time." Well, Monday morning, I called Bob Beard Ford and I said, "Look, I've been racing motorcycles as a kid all up to 1983, and I started racing cars in 1983. I said, I've been with my family, we've raced. I said, I got to find out who this is that's got this car. I want to see if I can help him," because I knew he'd probably be an independent driver. Back in the day, you did have independents who could go and race. They said, "Well, yeah, his name is Philip Duffy. He lives here in Augusta, Georgia." I didn't know Philip, never heard of him. So I asked, Jerry was a guy there at the dealership. He says, "Well, I'll take you out there and see if you can, meet him and maybe you can give him a hand." Well, Jerry took me out there after work one day and went to Philip's shop, very modest shop, a little wood frame shop, had enough room for 2 cars in it. I was amazed, and this is where history of NASCAR has really changed. There was one guy in there, he had, at that time, 2 race cars. He had the car that I'd seen, the Monte Carlo that I'd seen race at Charlotte, and he had this brand new Buick sitting behind me in the shop. And he was in the process of building this Buick for the 1988 season, and this is one guy by himself working in his shop by himself. And I said, "Man, I want to help you." I said, "I want to do anything I can to try to help you." So he said, "Well, what can you do?" I said, "I can fabricate. I can do whatever you need me to do." I said, "I've raced, I've driven, I've built race cars. I can do whatever you need me to do." So he says, "Well, let's start off with a battery cover. See if you can make a battery cover for this car." So that was my first experience. All right, let's fast forward just a little bit for a second. Philip Duffy and I have a mutual friend there in Augusta, Georgia. His name is Jay Dunham. Jay Dunham is a cool, old school car guy. He races nostalgia drag cars, plus he has a couple of street rods he plays with. He contacted me and said, "Hey, Ronnie," so would you be interested in restoring Philip's old Buick Regal, the last NASCAR he had? I said, "Would I?" "Yes." I said, "Do you know where it is?" He says, "It's at my shop." And he is so busy with his current project, he just did not have time to do the job on it. It was a massive undertaking when I went out there and saw the car in person. I saw why he didn't have the time to do it, because it's been a major job. But nonetheless, I told him I'd love to do it. And so I made the trip to Augusta to pick up the car. And we got there and it was in bad shape. Come to find out, the car had been stolen for a number of years. I'm not sure how long it had been gone. You got to think this car was last on the track in 1989, and then I think maybe 1990. It may have ran one race in 1990, but I know for sure 1989. But the car had been sitting outside. The floor pan was totally gone. The rocker panels were rotten. Didn't even exist on the bottom side of the body. We couldn't get anything out of the car. We started disassembling. Everything was just rusted. It was a disaster, and it was honestly too far gone, to be honest with you, for a restoration project. Yet this car meant so much to me personally. That's why I wanted to do the car. When we got ready to load the car up, and I was going to head and make the 13-hour trip back home, I happened to look under the back of it, and there was the battery box cover that I had made, the first task that Philip had given me back in 1988. And I could not believe this was still, it wasn't, luckily I noticed it was just sitting on top of the frame rail. It wasn't even tied to anything. It's a miracle. It would have been lost. When I saw this, I mean, I built this in 1988. This is the first thing I ever did on a NASCAR. And of course, as some of you know, are familiar with our channel, I left, actually moved to Charlotte and got to work for several more teams, several Busch teams, and eventually I was a gas man for Lake Speed. So I got to move up to some larger teams with bigger, lot larger budgets and multiple cars to race with. But this is the first car and the first thing I got to touch. That's why it meant so much to me. Now, going back now to 1988, when we built this car, when I got to Philip's shop, he had the Monte Carlo that I had seen run up at the Charlotte Motor Speedway. He was pulling all the parts off of it to put on this car. Well, it's interesting, the Monte Carlo was a rear steer car. This is a front steer car. And Philip told me he actually contacted Mike Laughlin, the chassis builder, and Mike said, look, all you got to do is just take the spindles off of the Monte Carlo and just reverse them and put it on this car. So we put the left on the right and right on the left, and that turned into a front steer car. You could never do stuff like that today. But again, this is back when you could go race as an independent, could show up, and if you met the NASCAR requirements and had track experience, which Philip had several years of experience at racing in Atlanta and some other tracks, Rockingham and stuff in his past, he could, as long as you could afford the car, he had the experience to be able to go and try to make a race. So that was really cool getting to do that. So he got all the parts off the Monte Carlo. He ended up selling it to Kirk Shelmerdine, who was the crew chief for Dale Earnhardt Sr. If you remember the Sportsman series that ran in the late 80s, late 80s up to early 90s, it was real popular for beginners to try to get going in NASCAR, but unfortunately it had some horrific crashes, and people actually lost their life and people got hurt, so they ended up pulling the plug on that series. But the Monte Carlo that I saw run in Charlotte, that Philip's old car, was the car that Kirk Shelmerdine won several races with in the Sportsman series. So it's crazy how all this stuff came full circle. But anyway, getting back, we picked the car up and we brought it back here to Charlotte. Back here to Louisiana, we started work on it. Now, one thing before we go to the next part, I do want to tell you, we built the car. In our first race, we tried to qualify. We went to the Firecracker 400 in July of 1988 after we finished the car, because I'd first seen Philip in May. So we built this car in about 2 months. I say we, Philip was doing the majority of the work. I was working full time during the day. We just could work on the car at night. But we tried to go to Daytona, did not make that race. We ended up going to 5 different races, and we finally made the Southern 500 the fall of 1988, and Philip was the last car to qualify. I could not believe it. So not only had I finally got a chance to touch and feel of a car that was going to race on a NASCAR series, I was actually going to be able to go and help pit the car, and that was such an amazing thing. So that is how the car ended up in my name, why it means so much to me. I'm going to show you just a couple of pictures here, and then this will end part 1 of this series, and we'll be back with you in part 2, and we'll go along further with the car. Thanks for watching. Well, guys, I hope that gives you a little better understanding of why we did this car in the first place and what it means to me personally. Stay tuned for part 2 of this series, and we're going to take a closer look at the car from the beginning to where we are now. Have a fantastic rest of your day. We'll see you next time on Race Car Fabrication and Restoration. God bless you. You take care.